I stood at the graveside in a black wool coat I had worn to exactly 3 funerals in the past 9 years, and I did not weep. I did not sway. I did not reach for my husband's hand. I set my weight evenly on both feet, pressed my palms flat against my thighs, and listened to my father Charles Winthrop address the crowd of 73 mourners with the same practiced, sorrowful cadence he had used at his own mother's wake, his voice dropping into a register of false grief that I had catalogued since I was 12 years old. He spoke of her legacy. He spoke of her vision. He spoke of her sharp mind right up until the end. Then he straightened his shoulders, adjusted the knot of his dark silk tie, and said, quietly enough that only the first 2 rows could hear, she wasn't of sound mind, of course. Not in her final months. We had been managing her affairs for some time. It's what she would have wanted. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I kept my face neutral and observed the slight tremor in his left hand, the way his wedding ring caught the November light, the nervous flick of his thumbnail against his index finger, a tell he had never learned to suppress and that I had first noticed when I was 15 years old, watching him lie to a banker about the status of a loan he had never intended to repay. I am Claire Winthrop. I am 47 years old. I am the chief operating officer of a regional logistics firm with a $12 million annual budget. And in the past 3 years, I have reduced operating costs by 23%, resolved 2 labor disputes without litigation, and renegotiated my parents' luxury car lease to prevent a default that would have cratered their credit score. All without their knowledge, and certainly without their gratitude. I said nothing. I stood in the November cold, my breath forming a thin vapor that dissipated before my eyes, and I made a decision that I did not recognize as a decision in that moment. I decided to wait. I decided to watch. I decided to let them believe that their words had landed on a woman too stunned to respond, too broken to fight, too insignificant to matter. They had no idea what they had just told me. Let me ask you something. If you are listening from your car, your kitchen, your treadmill, your quiet bedroom after the house has finally gone still, I want you to tell me what city you are in. Just the city. Leave it in the comments or send it in, whatever platform brought you here. I ask because I need to know that I am not alone in this. I need to know that somewhere out there, someone else has stood in a room full of people who believed they were invisible to her and chosen silence over spectacle, because silence is the only language that leaves no fingerprints. Now, let me take you back to how this nightmare started. The nightmare did not start at the funeral. The nightmare started 35 years ago, in the sprawling colonial house on Elmwood Drive, where my grandmother Evelyn Winthrop ran the company from a converted sewing room on the 2nd floor, her desk pushed against a window that overlooked the original factory across the street. I was 12 years old the first time she handed me a stack of invoices and asked me to sort them by date. I was 14 when she taught me to read a balance sheet. I was 16 when she showed me the corporate charter, a thick document bound in dark green leather, and walked me through the unanimous board approval clause that required every director to consent to any sale of the company. Restraint is power, she told me, her hand resting on my shoulder, her voice dry and unhurried. Let the law do your talking. You don't need to scream if the document is already on your side. She was lucid until her final breath. She was sharp. She was calculating. She was the only person in my family who ever looked at me and saw someone worth teaching. My parents saw something else. My father, Charles Winthrop, the architect of this particular disaster, is a man who has spent his entire life mistaking inheritance for accomplishment. He never built the company. He never grew it. He simply stood in the shadow of it and assumed the sunlight belonged to him. His verbal tick, the phrase he deploys whenever he wants to dismiss a difficult truth, is a quiet, condescending repetition of the same 3 words he used at the graveside: not of sound mind, not of sound mind, not of sound mind. He said it about Grandma when she refused to sign over the company to him early. He said it about me when I declined to cosign a loan for my brother Brock's failed restaurant venture. He says it about anyone who resists his version of reality, because it is easier to pathologize opposition than to answer it. My mother, Eleanor Winthrop, the enforcer, is the one who makes the phone calls. She is the one who arranges the meetings. She is the one who delivers the verdicts with a sympathetic tilt of her head and that soft, unassailable phrase, "It's what's best for the family." She said it when she convinced my father to move Grandma into assisted living without consulting me. She said it when she encouraged Brock to take over the company's day-to-day operations despite having no relevant experience. She said it when she called me last year to inform me, not ask me, that they were exploring options for the business. "You wouldn't understand, Claire," Brock had said, the beneficiary, the golden child, the son who had never once balanced a ledger in his life. He said it with his usual blend of condescension and false sympathy, as though my 14 years of operational experience, my graduate degree in supply chain management, my track record of turning around underperforming divisions, were somehow irrelevant to a conversation about a company I had helped my grandmother run for more than a decade. I understood perfectly. I understood that they were planning to sell the company out from under me. I understood that they believed I would simply accept it, because I had always accepted everything. I had been the invisible fixer for so long that they had forgotten I was even in the room. I had renegotiated their car lease without them knowing. I had paid off a tax lien on the family home using a shell account I had set up specifically for that purpose. I had resolved a dispute with a contractor who had threatened to sue them over an unpaid renovation, and I had done it over the phone in 47 minutes during my lunch break while they were at a charity gala pretending to be philanthropists. They never knew, they never asked, they never wondered why the problems kept disappearing. And I never told them, because the truth is that I was not being generous. I was not being selfless. I was building a file. I was collecting data. I was learning their patterns, their tells, their weaknesses, the exact pressure points where their arrogance made them blind. Every problem I solved was a data point. Every secret I kept was a thread I could pull later. I did not know I was building a case against them. I thought I was just surviving. But Grandma knew. Grandma saw the file cabinet in my mind before I did. She was the one who gave me the photograph, though I did not understand its significance until the day of her funeral. The photograph is a snapshot from 1969. It shows Grandma standing in front of the original factory, which was then a single-story brick building with a hand-painted sign that read Winthrop Manufacturing. She is holding the charter document in both hands, the leather cover open to the signature page, and her face is calm, deliberate, knowing. In the corner of the photograph, faint but legible, is a notary's timestamp. The date, the time, the official seal. She was of sound mind. She was always of sound mind. And that photograph proves it. I did not know she had left it for me. I did not know it existed until Catherine Lee, the company's former CEO, pulled me aside inside the funeral parlor, her eyes red but her voice steady, and pressed a manila envelope into my hands. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this," she said, her voice low. "She said you would know what to do with it." I opened the envelope in the bathroom, standing under the fluorescent light, my hands steady despite the tremor I could feel in my chest. I pulled out the photograph and a single sheet of paper. The paper was a copy of the corporate charter, with the unanimous board approval clause underlined in red ink. Below it, in my grandmother's handwriting, were 4 words, "You are a director." I folded the photograph and the paper into my coat pocket. I walked back into the funeral parlor. I accepted 3 condolence handshakes. I drank a cup of coffee I did not taste. I watched my parents circulate through the room, accepting sympathy for a loss they had already monetized, and I said nothing. I did not scream. I did not cry. I set my coffee cup down on a side table and noticed the way my mother's smile tightened when she thought no one was looking, the slight upward quiver at the corner of her mouth that was not grief but satisfaction. They had sold the company for $600,000. They had done it the morning after the funeral, while I was still selecting flowers for the arrangement, while I was still choosing a dress, while I was still pretending to be a daughter who mattered. $600,000. I called Valerie Torres that night. Valerie is a forensic accountant I had worked with on a case 3 years ago, a woman with a mind for paper trails so precise that she could reconstruct a decade of transactions from a single shredded document. She answered on the second ring, and I told her in a voice that did not shake that I needed a full audit of the sale. I needed to know who signed what when they signed it and whether the board had ever convened. "The board never convened," she said after a pause. "I can tell you that right now. If they had convened, you would have been notified." "I know," I said. "I need it in writing, 47 pages, every discrepancy, every procedural violation. I need it admissible." She did not ask why. She did not ask if I was sure. She said, "I will have it to you in 6 months," and she was as good as her word. 6 months passed. I went to work. I attended meetings. I smiled at my parents during Easter dinner, listening to my mother describe the renovations they were planning with the sale proceeds, the new kitchen, the vacation property, the gift they had already purchased for Brock's children that was, according to her, a celebration of the family's future. I nodded, I ate my ham, I cleared my plate. And on the 6th month, on a Tuesday at exactly 8 in the morning, Valerie's phone lit up. She sent me the audit, 47 pages. $486,000 in procedural violations. The sale was void ab initio, void from the beginning, because the board had never convened, and because my grandmother had transferred her shares into an irrevocable trust 3 years before her death, a trust whose sole beneficiaries were listed in a document that Valerie had obtained from the county clerk's office. The photograph proved she was of sound mind at the time of the transfer. The notary's timestamp was irrefutable. I filed for a temporary restraining order that afternoon. The judge granted it within 24 hours, freezing the entire $600,000 in escrow. My parents were served the papers at a community fundraiser. The host, a well-meaning woman with a loud voice and no sense of discretion, read the court summary aloud to the assembled guests before my father could stop her. They tried to sell a ghost, and I have not begun to show them what I have kept in that sewing room folder. The invitation arrived 3 days after the funeral, delivered by courier to my office, a thick cream envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. I opened it at my desk, across from a spreadsheet forecasting Q4 logistics costs, and read the single sheet of cardstock inside. The Winthrop family cordially invites you to a celebration of the company's successful transition. Dinner at the family home, 7 o'clock, black tie optional. I set the card down beside my keyboard. I looked at the clock on my computer screen, which read 3:47 in the afternoon. I had exactly 3 hours and 13 minutes to decide whether to attend a party celebrating the theft of my inheritance, the erasure of my grandmother's wishes, and the final confirmation that I was not considered a member of the family in any meaningful sense. I went. I went because the photograph was in my coat pocket. I went because the corporate charter was in a folder on my passenger seat. I went because I wanted to see their faces when they believed they had won, because I needed to memorize every detail of their satisfaction, every microexpression, every gesture of triumph that would later become evidence in a case I was already constructing. I arrived at the Winthrop family home at 7:04, precisely 4 minutes late, which is a strategic delay I have used for years to signal that I am not eager, not desperate, not beholden. The Colonial sat at the end of a long driveway lined with bare maple trees, their branches reaching toward the gray November sky like the fingers of a skeleton. The garden was neglected, as it had been for years, the flower beds overgrown with dead weeds, the lawn patchy and brown. My grandmother had maintained that garden herself until she was 82, kneeling in the dirt with a trowel, her hands gloved, her straw hat tilted against the sun. After she moved to assisted living, my mother hired a landscaper who came once a month and did the bare minimum, and the garden had become a metaphor for everything the family let decay when no one was watching. I parked my sedan behind Brock's new SUV, a gloss black vehicle with dealer tags still attached, purchased with money that should not have been his. I sat in the car for a full minute, engine running, heater blowing warm air across my face. I pressed my palm against the manila envelope on the passenger seat, feeling the outline of the photograph and the charter copy inside. Then I turned off the engine, stepped out into the cold, and walked up the front steps. The door was unlocked. It was always unlocked at family gatherings because my mother believed that locking the door signaled distrust, and she preferred to project an image of open hospitality while cataloging every guest's shoes. I stepped inside. The house smelled of roasted meat and butter and the faint mustiness of old upholstery. The foyer was crowded with people I recognized from a dozen similar events: aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, business associates of my father who had come to congratulate him on a sale that had made him suddenly liquid. They held glasses of wine. They laughed. They nodded at me with the vague recognition reserved for the family member who was present but not central, the one who worked in logistics, the one who faded into the wallpaper. I counted the room. 31 adults, 9 children running between legs, 3 serving staff circulating with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I noted the exits, the sightlines, the positions of my parents and brother. My father stood near the fireplace, holding court with a group of men in dark suits, his posture expansive, his voice carrying. My mother glided between clusters of guests, touching arms, kissing cheeks, performing the role of gracious hostess with practiced ease. Brock leaned against the kitchen island, a beer in his hand, laughing with two cousins who had always found him charming and had never once asked me about my job. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I did not drink it. I held it as a prop, a shield, a reason to keep my hands occupied while I observed. The dynamics of the room were transparent to me in the way that a balance sheet is transparent to someone who has spent years reading them. My father was the center, radiating the confidence of a man who believed he had pulled off a masterstroke. My mother was the facilitator, ensuring that no one questioned the narrative, that no dissenting voice rose above the hum of approval. Brock was the heir apparent, the son who had done nothing and received everything, his ease a direct product of his entitlement. They performed unity. They performed success. They performed the fiction of a family that had acted together in good faith. And I stood against the wall, in a black dress I had bought at a department store 3 years ago, its fabric soft from wear but still structured enough to hold its shape, and I waited. They found me eventually. They always did. My mother approached first, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her smile fixed in place. She wore a champagne-colored silk blouse and tailored black trousers, her jewelry understated and expensive, her hair swept back in a style that suggested effortless elegance but had required 90 minutes with a stylist. "Claire, darling," she said, touching my arm, "I'm so glad you came. I was worried you might not feel up to it." I returned her smile with one of equal measure. I wouldn't miss it. She studied my face for a moment, searching for the crack she expected to find. When she did not find it, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your father wants to say a few words later. Family toast. I hope you'll join us in the dining room." "Of course." She hesitated, then leaned in, her voice dropping to a register that was meant to sound intimate but felt like a blade. "You understand, Claire, that this was what was best for the family. Your grandmother wasn't herself at the end. She wasn't of sound mind. We had to act decisively." There it was, the phrase, spoken not at a graveside this time, but in my own family home, in front of 31 guests who had no idea what she had just admitted to me. I did not flinch. I did not respond. I held her gaze and saw the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, the flicker of uncertainty that crossed her eyes when I did not react the way she expected. She had anticipated tears, anger, a scene. She had prepared for emotional collapse. She had not prepared for silence. "Of course," I said again, and I watched her turn away, her shoulders relaxing as she dismissed me and returned to her guests. She thought that was the ending. She thought the line had landed, that I had accepted it, that I would fold myself into the corner and let them have their celebration. She had no idea that I had already catalogued her words, time-stamped them in my memory, added them to the file I was building. I stayed for the toast. My father raised his glass, praised the legacy of the company, thanked his mother for her vision, and announced that the sale had closed at $600,000, which would be distributed according to the family's needs. He looked at Brock. He looked at my mother. He did not look at me. I raised my glass with the rest of them. I did not drink. The dinner lasted 2 hours. I sat at the far end of the table, between a second cousin who asked me twice what I did for a living and a family friend who spent the meal describing her daughter's wedding plans. I ate the roasted chicken. I complimented the vegetables. I laughed when the conversation required laughter. I performed the role of the agreeable daughter, the unobjectionable relative, the woman who had been outmaneuvered and had accepted her fate. And all the while, I was counting. $600,000. The photograph in my pocket, the charter in my car, the notary's timestamp, the trust, the clause, the board that had never convened, the sale that was void ab initio. I left at 9:38, excusing myself with a headache that I did not have to fake, because the tension in my jaw had begun to ache and I needed to be alone. I walked to my car in the cold, my breath clouding in the dark, and I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and my hands on the steering wheel. The house behind me glowed with warm light. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter through the walls. They were celebrating. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to Catherine Lee's contact, the former CEO, the woman who had handed me the photograph at the funeral. I called her. She answered on the first ring. "Claire, I need you to confirm something," I said. "The minute book. The original, does it still exist?" A pause. Then quietly, I kept it. "Your grandmother asked me to hold it before she went into assisted living. It's in a safety deposit box at my bank. Can you access it tomorrow?" I can access it tonight if you need me to. I closed my eyes. The photograph was real, the charter was real, the trail was intact. Tonight, I said, I'll meet you at the bank at 6 in the morning. Claire, she said, and her voice cracked slightly. Are you sure about this? I have never been more sure about anything in my life. I hung up. I called Valerie Torres next. She answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the hour. Valerie, I have a job for you. Define the scope. Full audit of the sale of Winthrop Manufacturing. I need you to reconstruct every transaction, every signature, every board action from the past 3 years. I need to know if the board ever convened to approve the sale. The board never convened, she said flatly. You already know that. I need it in writing, I need it admissible, I need 47 pages of evidence that the sale is void. She was silent for a moment, then, I'll start tonight. I'll have preliminary findings in 2 weeks, full report in 6 months. 6 months is acceptable. She asked no further questions. She knew my grandmother, she knew the trust. She knew that I was not the kind of woman who made threats I could not back up. I started the engine. I drove home through the empty streets, past the houses with their Christmas decorations already glowing, past the gas stations and the strip malls and the familiar landmarks of a city I had lived in my entire life. When I walked into my apartment, I took the photograph out of my coat pocket and laid it on the kitchen counter. I stood there for a long time, looking at my grandmother's face, at the notary's timestamp in the corner, at the charter document in her hands. She had planned for this. She had known they would try, and she had left me the weapon I needed. The photograph went into the sewing room folder, exactly where she had left it for me, and I closed the drawer. Across town, in the colonial house on Elmwood Drive, my parents and my brother were still celebrating a victory that had not yet happened. The bank's security door opened at 5:58 in the morning, and Catherine Lee stepped out into the cold with a leather briefcase clutched to her chest, her breath crystallizing in the air. She had aged in the 2 years since she retired, her hair gray now, the lines around her eyes deeper, but her posture was still the posture of a woman who had run a company for 12 years and had never lost a negotiation. She handed me the briefcase without a word, and I took it with both hands, feeling the weight of something I knew was heavier than paper. She had kept the corporate minute book. She had kept every resolution, every motion, every meeting record from the founding of the company in 1969 to the date my grandmother entered assisted living. She had kept the original charter with the green leather cover. She had kept the photograph, which I already had. And she had kept the trust documents, the originals, signed and notarized in my grandmother's own hand. Your grandmother called me 3 days before she went into the facility, Catherine said, her voice low. She told me to take the minute book and the charter and the trust and put them somewhere no one could find them. She said, Catherine, they are going to try to sell the company over Claire's body. Do not let them. I opened the briefcase in my car, the interior light casting a yellow glow over the documents. I found the trust first. It was dated June 4, 2019, 3 years before my grandmother's death, 2 years before she was diagnosed with anything. The document was clear, unambiguous, and notarized. It named me and Catherine as co-trustees. It transferred all shares of Winthrop Manufacturing into an irrevocable trust, the terms of which stated that the company could not be sold without the unanimous consent of the board, and that the board consisted of 3 people, my grandmother, Catherine, and me. My parents had sold a company that my grandmother had already placed beyond their reach. I closed the briefcase and drove to Valerie Torres' office, arriving at 7:12 in the morning. Valerie was already at her desk, a cup of coffee cooling beside her keyboard, a stack of financial records spread across her workspace. She looked up when I entered, her face serious, her eyes sharp. Let me see what you have. I placed the briefcase on her desk and opened it. Valerie pulled out the trust documents, the charter, the minute book, the photograph. She studied the photograph for a long moment, her finger tracing the notary's timestamp. This is dated August 18, 1969, she said. Your grandmother was 32 years old. She was of sound mind. This is irrefutable. I know. She began reading the trust. She made notes. She cross-referenced dates and signatures. Then she pulled out her preliminary findings, a report that had grown from 10 pages to 22 pages in the 2 weeks since I had first called her. Your parents signed the sale documents on November 16, she said, tapping a page. That's the day after the funeral. They claimed they had power of attorney. They claimed your grandmother had authorized the sale before her death. They presented a document that appears to be signed by your grandmother, dated October 8 of this year. It's a forgery. Almost certainly. The signature is close, but the ink is too consistent. There's no variation. Your grandmother's signature had a slight tremor in the final downward stroke of the W. This one is smooth. A forger would not have known that. I felt a stillness settle over me, a quiet clarity that I had not experienced since the funeral. This was not revenge. This was restoration. This was the law doing what I had asked it to do. How long until you have the full report? 4 months. Maybe 5. I need to reconstruct the entire transaction trail, trace the escrow accounts, verify the notary stamps on the power of attorney. But I can give you enough now to file a preliminary injunction. Do it. I left her office at 8:04, the briefcase back in my hands, the photograph in my coat pocket. I walked out into a gray November morning, the sky low and heavy, and I felt the weight of the weeks ahead. The weeks became months. December became January. January bled into February. Winter held the city in a cold grip, and I moved through the days with a patience I had learned from my grandmother, a patience that had nothing to do with acceptance and everything to do with timing. I attended Christmas at the family home. I sat in the living room with the tree my mother had decorated in white and gold, the presents arranged beneath it in careful symmetry. My father opened a bottle of expensive whiskey and proposed a toast to the family's future. Brock laughed, his arm around his wife, his children tearing through wrapping paper on the floor. My mother circulated with a platter of cookies, pausing to kiss cheeks, to admire gifts, to make sure everyone was happy. I accepted a gift from my mother, a silk scarf in a shade of blue I did not wear, wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a ribbon. I thanked her with a smile that I had practiced in the mirror. I watched as she crossed the room to Brock and handed him an envelope that contained, I later learned from a casual mention, a check for $17,000, a share of the sale proceeds distributed as a holiday bonus. I did not react. I did not ask why I had not received a check. I did not mention that I had not been included in the distribution. I simply added the number to the running tally in my mind. $17,000, plus the $46,000 my parents had spent on the new SUV, plus the $33,000 they had paid for the vacation property deposit, plus the $122,000 they had transferred to a brokerage account in their names, plus the $600,000 in escrow that the judge had not yet frozen because I had not yet filed. I was building the case. I was waiting for the report. I was gathering every piece of evidence that would later make their defense impossible. In January, I attended my mother's birthday dinner at a restaurant in the city. The table was set for 12. I sat between a cousin and a family friend, and I listened as my father described the renovations to the new vacation property, the hardwood floors, the granite countertops, the hot tub that was being installed on the deck. $600,000 goes a long way, he said, raising his glass, if you know how to use it. You wouldn't understand, Claire, Brock added, leaning across the table with that condescending smile. This is about building something for the next generation. You've always been too focused on the details to see the big picture. I looked at him. I saw the small gap between his front teeth, the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead, the way his eyes darted away from mine when he finished speaking. He was not as confident as he pretended. He was nervous. He was afraid that I would eventually ask the right questions, but I did not ask them. Not yet. I cut a piece of steak. I chewed it slowly. I swallowed. You're right, I said. I don't understand. If you have ever been in a room where someone you trusted stole from you and smiled, raise a hand. Leave a comment. Tell me you know how it feels. Tell me that you remember the precise second when you realized that the person across the table was not your family but your adversary. I ask because I need to know that I am not the only one who has learned to smile back. February dragged. The days were short and cold, and I spent my evenings in my apartment, reviewing the documents Valerie sent me in installments. The forgery evidence was solid. The trust documents were unassailable. The board records showed that no meeting had ever been convened to approve the sale. The only signatures on the sale documents were those of my parents and Brock, none of whom were named as directors or trustees. On a Tuesday evening at 7:15, my phone rang. Valerie's name appeared on the screen. I have the full report, she said. 47 pages. Admissible. Complete. I can deliver it to you tomorrow morning. I sat down on my couch, the photograph in my hand. Tell me the final number. The sale is void ab initio. The trust owns the company. The board never convened. The signatures on the power of attorney are forgeries. The $600,000 in escrow is the proceeds of an illegal transaction. You have grounds for a temporary restraining order, a permanent injunction, and a civil suit for conversion. How much? Everything. The entire $600,000, plus legal fees, plus damages. The trust is entitled to full restitution. I closed my eyes. I heard my grandmother's voice, her hand on my shoulder, her quiet certainty. Restraint is power. Let the law do your talking. I'll meet you at your office at 8 o'clock, I said. I hung up. I walked to the sewing room, the small room in my apartment that I had converted into a workspace, and I opened the drawer where I kept the manila folder. The photograph was already inside, the charter copy, the trust summary, the note from my grandmother. Now I added the file that Valerie had sent me electronically, printed on heavy paper, collated, tabbed, ready for court. I bound the report with a black binder clip, the kind that holds 200 pages without slipping. I placed it in a manila envelope, the same kind my grandmother had used for decades, the ones she kept in the sewing room at the family home. I wrote the date on the outside. I sealed it. The next morning, I filed for a temporary restraining order in the county superior court. I named my parents and Brock as respondents. I submitted the 47-page audit as Exhibit A, I attached the photograph as Exhibit B, I attached the trust documents as Exhibit C. The judge reviewed the filing at 1:37 in the afternoon. At 2:04, she signed the order freezing the $600,000 in escrow. At 6 o'clock that evening, a process server delivered the papers to the community fundraiser where my parents were attending a charity auction. The host read the court summary aloud, not out of malice but out of shock, because the document was a matter of public record and she had not thought to stop reading before the room went quiet. And on Saturday morning, as my mother selected her dress for the fundraiser, she had no idea that the invitation I had received was not to celebrate, but to witness the fall. The ballroom of the Emerson Grand Hotel was a cathedral of crystal chandeliers and white linen, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of 100 conversations conducted at a volume designed to be overheard. I stood near the bar, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, watching the room with the same clinical attention I had brought to every quarterly audit I had ever conducted. The charity fundraiser was in its second hour, the silent auction tables crowded with donated items, the live auction set to begin at 8 o'clock. My parents had purchased a table in the center of the room, a round table draped in ivory satin, centered under a chandelier that cast a warm light over their guests. My mother wore a dress of deep burgundy silk, her hair swept up, her diamond earrings catching the light every time she turned her head. She was laughing at something a man in a gray suit had said, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, her posture radiating the ease of a woman who believed she had already won. My father stood beside her, a glass of scotch in his hand, his face flushed from the warmth of the room and the satisfaction of being seen. Brock was at the bar, ordering a round for his friends, his credit card already out, the black card that had been funded by proceeds he had no right to spend. I had been in the ballroom for 41 minutes. I had spoken to no one. I had watched them perform their victory for the assembled crowd, and I had felt the photograph in my coat pocket, the weight of it pressing against my ribs. At 7:38, my mother excused herself from her conversation and walked toward me. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, a steady rhythm that I had heard in 1,000 hallways over 47 years. She stopped in front of me, her smile fixed, her eyes scanning my face for the weakness she expected to find. "Claire, darling." "You came alone?" "I did. Your father and I were worried about you. You seem so distant lately. We thought perhaps you needed some time away from the family drama." She said it lightly, as though the theft of my inheritance was a minor inconvenience, a misunderstanding to be smoothed over with a kind word. "I'm fine, Mother." She tilted her head, studying me. "You know, we never meant to exclude you from the sale. It was just that your grandmother's affairs were so complicated at the end. She wasn't herself. She wasn't of sound mind. We had to act quickly." There it was, the third time I had heard the phrase, the third time she had used it as a lever, a justification, a dismissal of everything my grandmother had built and everything I had inherited. I set my glass down on a nearby table. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the photograph. I held it up, the notary's timestamp visible in the corner, my grandmother's face clear and sharp and entirely present. "This photograph was taken in 1969, I said, my voice steady. "It shows Grandma holding the original corporate charter. The notary's timestamp proves she was of sound mind. And this document, which I have in my other pocket, is a copy of the trust she established 3 years before her death. It transferred all shares of Winthrop Manufacturing into an irrevocable trust that named me and Catherine Lee as co-trustees. The company could not be sold without the unanimous consent of the board. The board never convened. The sale is void ab initio. My mother's smile froze. Her eyes moved from the photograph to my face, searching for the lie, the bluff, the misdirection. She found none. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice dropping. I pulled out a second envelope, the official court documents, and handed them to her. "I filed a temporary restraining order this afternoon. The $600,000 in escrow has been frozen. The sale is void. The company reverts to the trust. And you, Father, and Brock are now the subjects of a civil suit for conversion." She took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it. She read the first page, her face draining of color, the burgundy of her dress suddenly garish against the pallor of her skin. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I told you," I said, my voice carrying just enough to be heard by the woman standing nearest to us, a board member who had been watching the conversation with growing curiosity. "Restraint is power. I let the law do my talking." The room began to shift. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. My father, sensing the disturbance, walked toward us, his Scotch glass still in his hand, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern to something that looked very much like fear. "Eleanor, what's going on?" My mother did not answer. She handed him the papers. He read them, his face cycling through the same progression I had seen 1,000 times in negotiation: denial, confusion, anger, collapse. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "This is a misunderstanding. Claire, you cannot do this. We are your family. You sold my inheritance the morning after Grandma's funeral. You forged her signature. You claimed she was not of sound mind when the photograph proves she was lucid and prepared. You are not my family. You are defendants in a civil suit." The room was fully quiet now. The auctioneer had stopped speaking. The guests had turned, their faces a mixture of shock and fascination. I saw the hotel manager step forward, his phone already in his hand, calling for security. I saw the board member who had been listening excuse herself and walk quickly toward the exit. And I saw Brock emerge from the bar, his smile fading as he registered the silence, his eyes finding the papers in my father's trembling hands. "What the hell is going on?" I did not answer him. I turned to the room, to the 100 faces that were watching, and I spoke clearly enough for every person in the ballroom to hear. "The temporary restraining order is effective immediately. The $600,000 in the escrow account is frozen pending a full hearing. The trust will reclaim all assets of Winthrop Manufacturing. Any funds that have been distributed from the sale must be returned. Any assets purchased with those funds must be surrendered. The court will appoint a receiver to manage the company until the trust is fully reinstated." My mother began to cry. Not the controlled tears she deployed at funerals and weddings, but genuine tears, the tears of a woman who had just watched her entire plan collapse in a single conversation. She clutched my father's arm, her fingers digging into the burgundy silk of his jacket. "Charles, do something." My father looked at me. His face was gray, his voice thin. "Claire, please. We can talk about this. We can work something out." I looked at him. For a moment, I saw the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who had held my hand when I was 5 years old and afraid of the dark. I saw the father I had once loved, buried under decades of greed and cowardice, and the comfortable lie that the family's needs came before mine. "There is nothing to work out," I said. "The law is clear. The trust is binding. The sale is void. The company will return to its rightful owners." I did not slam the door. I left it open exactly 1 inch. "But," I said, looking at my father, "if you want to make things right, you can start by telling the truth. You can tell the court that you knew Grandma was of sound mind. You can tell them that you forged the power of attorney. You can tell them that Brock had no authority to sign anything. And you can return every dollar you have taken from the trust." My mother's crying stopped abruptly. She stared at me, her face hard. "You want us to confess to a crime. I want you to do the right thing for the first time in your life." I did not wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the exit, the photograph still in my hand, the court documents still in my coat pocket. I heard my mother's voice rise behind me, a string of words I did not stop to decipher. I heard Brock's voice, high and panicked, demanding to know what was happening. I heard the murmur of the crowd, the rustle of fabric, the click of heels as people shifted to watch me leave. I walked through the lobby of the Emerson Grand Hotel, past the front desk, past the bellman, past the glass doors that opened onto the cold February night. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed, a text from Catherine Lee. "I heard. Are you okay?" I typed back. "I am exactly where I need to be." I started the engine and drove home. The fallout was swift. Within 72 hours, the court had appointed a receiver to manage the company. The escrow account was frozen. The trust was reinstated. My mother and father retained an attorney who filed a motion to vacate the temporary restraining order, a motion that was denied within 48 hours. Brock, who had spent almost the entirety of his share of the proceeds, was ordered to liquidate the assets he had purchased: the SUV, the vacation property deposit, the brokerage account. I did not attend the hearings. I did not speak to the press. I did not answer the phone when my mother called, which she did 16 times over the course of 3 days, leaving messages that progressed from confusion to anger to pleading to sobbing resignation. On the 4th day, my father appeared at my office. He stood in the reception area, his coat unbuttoned, his face haggard. He had not shaved. He looked older than I had ever seen him. "Claire," he said when I stepped into the hallway. "Please. Just give me 5 minutes." I led him to the small conference room at the end of the hall. I closed the door. I did not sit down. "Say what you came to say." He stood with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. "I know we were wrong. I know we should have included you. I know the sale was handled badly." "Handled badly is a euphemism for fraud, father." He flinched. I know what we did. But please, Claire, your mother is not well. She has not slept in days. Brock's family is struggling. They are going to lose their house." I looked at him. I saw the tremor in his hands, the dark circles under his eyes, the desperation that had finally broken through the facade of confidence he had maintained for so long. "You have exactly one chance," I said. "You can tell the court the truth. You can admit that you knew Grandma was of sound mind. You can admit that you forged the power of attorney. You can admit that Brock had no authority to sign the sale documents. If you do that, I will recommend that the court consider a reduced penalty. And if I do not, then the full weight of the trust's legal resources will be directed at you. The company will pursue damages for the full value of the sale plus legal fees plus interest. You will lose everything, and you will do it publicly." He stared at me. His eyes were wet. "You would do that to your own father? I would do that to anyone who stole from my grandmother's legacy." I did not hate him. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt the quiet certainty of a woman who had followed a path that had been laid for her years before she understood it, and who had arrived at the destination her grandmother had prepared. "The door is open for 1 week," I said. "After that, the offer expires." I left him in the conference room. I walked back to my office and closed the door. He told the truth. He told the court everything. He admitted to forging the power of attorney. He admitted that he and my mother had pressured Brock to sign the sale documents. He admitted that he had known my grandmother was of sound mind when she established the trust. My mother refused to testify. She hired new counsel and attempted to shift blame to my father. She failed. The court found her liable for conversion and ordered her to pay restitution from her personal assets. The vacation property, already in her name, was seized and sold. The brokerage account was frozen. The diamond earrings were appraised and included in the settlement. Brock, who had spent nearly all of his share, was ordered to make monthly payments from his income for the next 5 years. He lost the SUV. He lost the vacation property deposit. He lost the black card and the credit limit that had made him feel like a success. I did not attend the final hearing. I did not need to. The trust was intact. The company was restored. The equity had been recovered, a total of $2,342,000, including legal fees and damages, all of which was placed back into the trust for the benefit of the company and its employees. And my grandmother's legacy, the company she had built with her own hands, the sewing room where she had taught me to read a balance sheet, the charter she had held in the photograph from 1969, was exactly where it belonged. 6 months later, I sat in my penthouse office on the top floor of the fully restored company headquarters, a panoramic view of the river stretching from floor to ceiling, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. The company was thriving. The employees who had worried about their jobs under new ownership had been reassured. The contracts that had been put on hold were renegotiated. The revenue was higher than it had been in a decade. On the wall behind my desk, framed in dark wood, hung the photograph from 1969. My grandmother's face looked out at me, her hands holding the charter, the notary's timestamp visible in the corner. She had planned for this. She had known that I would need proof, that I would need patience, that I would need the law on my side. And she had given me all of it. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the river, the slow movement of the water, the steady rhythm of a world that continued turning regardless of the dramas that played out within it. I had learned 5 truths in the process of reclaiming my inheritance. 5 truths that I had earned with years of silence and a single photograph. I share them with you now because I know that someone listening is standing where I stood, holding her own photograph, waiting for the courage to use it. The first truth: silence in the moment of betrayal is not weakness, it is the gathering of evidence. When they attacked me at the graveside, when they dismissed me at the dinner table, when they wrote me out of the distribution, I did not scream. I did not fight. I documented. I cataloged. I waited, because the loudest voice in the room is rarely the one that wins. The quietest voice is the one that reads the verdict. The second truth: those who dismiss your seeing will fail to anticipate your knowing. My parents believed that I was too passive to act, too distracted to notice, too loyal to fight. They saw my silence as acceptance. They saw my absence from their meetings as ignorance. They did not understand that I had been watching them for 35 years and that I knew exactly who they were and what they had done. The third truth: victory is not the destruction of your enemy. It is the cessation of your dependence on them. I did not destroy my parents. I did not bankrupt them. I simply removed them from the equation. The trust did not need them. The company did not need them. I did not need them. And that was the greatest victory of all, to be free of the people who had spent my entire life believing that I was less than them. The fourth truth: a trust is stronger than any signature obtained by coercion. My grandmother knew that they would try to take what she had built. She did not fight them. She did not confront them. She built a legal structure that was stronger than any lie they could tell. She placed her legacy in a container that could not be broken by force, and she left me the key. The fifth truth: the law rewards the patient, not the loud. I waited 6 months for the forensic audit. I waited 47 years for the photograph to become a weapon. I waited through every holiday, every dinner, every conversation where they dismissed me and I said nothing. And when the moment came, I acted with the full weight of the evidence and the full authority of the law. I still have the photograph. It hangs on the wall of my office, above the desk where I now run the company my grandmother built. I look at it every day. I remember the notary's timestamp. I remember the charter document in her hands. I remember the quiet certainty in her voice when she told me that restraint is power. Keep your boundaries strong. Guard your peace, and I will see you in the next.